April 16th, 1943. A commandant at a Soviet POW facility outside Moscow tears open an encrypted telegram from Berlin. 5 words stop his breath. "We have your son. Trade?" It's signed by SS intelligence. Stalin's eldest son, Yakov Jugashvili, captured at Smolensk in 1941. This much the world knows. The Germans are offering an exchange. Yakov for Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, highest-ranking officer captured at Stalingrad. Stalin's public position has been clear, repeated in every speech. We do not trade marshals for lieutenants. But the commandant holds something else, a leather-bound photograph, Stalin's family portrait from 1932. Yakov prominent in the frame. It's been passed between NKVD offices for weeks. Someone's tracking something. Intelligence reports reveal 3 previous secret negotiations, all officially denied. The photograph sits on Stalin's desk now, marked with red pencil. One question tears through Moscow's classified corridors. What did Stalin actually do when no one was watching? The real exchange happened, but it wasn't the one history recorded. July 16th, 1941. Senior Lieutenant Yakov Jugashvili crouches in a shattered farmhouse outside Lyozno, Belarus. Artillery officer, 29 years old, surrounded by German panzer advance. His unit has been cut off for 3 days. When German infantry stormed the position at dawn, Yakov surrenders with 60 other Soviet soldiers. A routine capture until a German intelligence officer examines Yakov's documents. The name stops him cold. He radios Berlin within the hour. By nightfall, Nazi propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels knows. They have Stalin's son. In Moscow, Stalin receives the report 2 days later during a war cabinet meeting. His response, documented by 3 witnesses. They all get captured. He is no different. The meeting continues. But within 48 hours, something shifts. The leather-bound photograph, Stalin's family portrait from 1932, vanishes from his Kremlin office. Staff notice, but say nothing. It reappears in Lavrenti Beria's office at NKVD headquarters. Why move a family photo to the secret police chief? Stalin begins delivering speeches about traitors and weakness, pointedly mentioning soldiers who surrender. He never says Yakov's name. But the NKVD, quietly, obsessively, begins tracking every scrap of intelligence about Yakov's location and condition. August 1941. German propaganda radio broadcasts across Soviet front lines. A voice, identified as Yakov Jugashvili, reads a prepared statement criticizing Soviet command. The broadcast is genuine. Yakov's voice, verified by those who knew him. But intelligence officers that something. The statement contains subtle refusals, coded resistance. Yakov reads the script but refuses to embellish, refuses to call for surrender, refuses everything beyond the exact words placed before him. German interrogators grow frustrated. They want Stalin's son to become a symbol of Soviet failure. Yakov gives them only minimum compliance. In Moscow, Stalin's response is public and brutal. I have no son, Yakov. The statement is printed in Pravda, repeated on Soviet radio. The message is clear. Stalin disowns him. But privately, NKVD operations intensify. Agents track Yakov's transfer from camp to camp. Every German communication mentioning Jugashvili is intercepted, decoded, filed. The photograph appears in these classified files now. Not in Stalin's office, not in his home. In active NKVD operational folders. Someone is monitoring this obsessively. When Yakov is moved to a special interrogation facility in East Prussia, Soviet intelligence knows within 72 hours. When German officers visit him, Moscow knows within a week. The contradiction is stark. Stalin publicly calls Yakov a traitor while secretly tracking his every movement. The dual life is complete: public disavowal, private surveillance. Was it strategic calculation or something else? Stalin's image as unbreakable, cold, absolute. This required public rejection. But the photograph stayed in the files. Early 1942. A Swiss banker in Zurich receives an unusual visitor, a German diplomat with no official status. The conversation is brief, coded, but the message reaches Moscow through intelligence channels within days. The Germans are probing. Would the Soviets consider exchanges for certain valuable prisoners? No names mentioned, no explicit offers, just a question floating through neutral territory. Stalin's public answer comes in a February speech. The Soviet Union does not negotiate with fascist criminals. We do not trade. The response is broadcast across Europe. Case closed, it seems. Except Stalin doesn't actually close the channel. He doesn't respond directly, but he doesn't cut communication either. Beria receives quiet instructions. Monitor these channels. Gather intelligence. Keep doors ajar but unmarked. The photograph is pulled from the files again. Stalin looks at it during a late-night strategy meeting. 3 advisors present, all later interrogated by Soviet historians. They remember Stalin holding the photograph, saying nothing about it, then placing it face down and continuing discussion of frontline logistics. Why keep the photograph in active rotation if Yakov means nothing? Why track every German communication if Stalin truly disowned him? The tension is building in Moscow's secret corridors. Something is happening beneath the official narrative. German radio continues broadcasting Yakov's statements, always minimal, always resistant. Yakov refuses to denounce his father, refuses to call for Soviet surrender, gives the Germans nothing useful. Reports reach Moscow. Yakov is maintaining discipline, maintaining dignity. Stalin hears these reports. The photograph remains in Beria's office. The contradiction grows sharper: absolute public rejection, absolute private attention. February 3, 1943. Stalingrad. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus surrenders with the German 6th Army, 91,000 men, the greatest military disaster in German history. Paulus is the highest-ranking German officer ever captured by any Allied power. The propaganda value is immeasurable. Stalin orders Paulus treated well, held in comfortable quarters, interrogated carefully. And within a week, something changes in the German approach to Yakov. The messages coming through neutral channels suddenly intensify, become explicit. The offer is now clear. Paulus for Yakov Djugashvili. The Germans want their field marshal back. Stalin's calculation shifts immediately. Paulus is worth something: intelligence, propaganda, perhaps more. Yakov was a lieutenant, now just another POW. But Paulus represents something bigger. The photograph appears at a war strategy meeting on February 8th. Stalin places it on the table in front of 4 generals. No explanation. They discuss Paulus, German morale, leverage. The photograph sits there, Yakov's face visible. Then Stalin picks it up, returns it to his desk drawer. The meeting continues. No one mentions the photograph, but everyone notices. German negotiators in Stockholm begin formal inquiries. Would Moscow consider exchanges? The offers are probing but serious. Soviet responses are carefully non-committal, not no, but not yes. The communications multiply. Intelligence officers count 17 separate exchanges between Moscow and Berlin through March and April, routed through Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey. 17 conversations about terms, conditions, possibilities. Stalin's public position never wavers. We don't trade marshals for lieutenants. But the meetings keep happening. Beria personally oversees the negotiations. The photograph is present at these sessions. What was Stalin actually considering? March 1943. The 17 communications between Moscow and Berlin reveal a pattern. The Germans want Paulus desperately. Soviet intelligence analyzes the desperation. It's about German officer morale collapsing. If Paulus stays captured, the message to every German general is clear. Surrender might be better than death. Stalin recognizes the strategic value immediately, and he begins playing a different game. The negotiations continue, but Stalin isn't negotiating for Yakov's return. He's using these conversations to gather intelligence about German POW priorities, about which officers the Germans value most, about internal Wehrmacht politics. Each negotiation becomes a fishing expedition. Soviet representatives ask questions, probe German responses, map the hierarchy of value. Yakov is the bait for extracting information about how desperate Germany has become. The photograph appears on Stalin's desk more frequently now, but it's being used as a prop in a different strategy. Stalin shows it to advisors, to intelligence chiefs. This is what they think matters to us, he tells Beria during one late-night meeting. The statement is recorded in Beria's diary, declassified in 1992. Stalin is demonstrating something. The West thinks sentiment drives Soviet decisions. Stalin wants to prove the opposite, that calculation, cold strategic thinking, matters more than blood. The negotiations continue. German offers become more detailed. Specific terms, timing, logistics. Soviet responses remain vague, keeping channels open, extracting more intelligence. By late March, Soviet intelligence has mapped German desperation levels, identified which captured officers matter most to Berlin, and understood how close German military morale is to breaking. All of this from negotiations about trading one lieutenant. The Germans think they're negotiating for Yakov. Stalin is negotiating for leverage. The photograph stays on his desk, but it's become a tool, not a memento. April 1943. Intelligence reports arrive in Moscow detailing Yakov's conditions at Sachsenhausen concentration camp, north of Berlin. He's held in the officers' section, separate from general population, relatively better treatment, but still isolated, still imprisoned. German interrogators have tried everything: promises of release, threats, offers of comfortable post-war life in Germany. Yakov refuses every approach. Documented by German records captured after the war, Yakov Jugashvili maintains complete defiance. He will read scripted propaganda if forced, but nothing more. He won't elaborate, won't call for Soviet surrender, won't denounce Stalin beyond the minimum words placed directly before him. German frustration is evident in the interrogation logs. They have Stalin's son, perfect propaganda weapon, and he's giving them nothing useful. The reports reach Stalin's desk. Beria delivers them personally. The photograph is annotated now with details. Sachsenhausen, Block 2, Officer-Prisoner section. Stalin reads the interrogation summaries. Yakov's responses show something: discipline, refusal to break, maintenance of dignity under pressure. Stalin's reaction, recorded by one aide, a long silence then. He's holding. Just those two words. The photograph is placed back in the desk drawer. But something has shifted. Stalin respects strength, respects refusal to break. Yakov is demonstrating both. And yet Stalin won't trade for him. The principle matters more. Soviet marshals aren't worth the same as German field marshals in Stalin's calculation. To trade Paulus for Yakov would signal that sentiment drives decisions, would show weakness to both Germany and the West. Stalin's reputation is built on ruthlessness, on placing state above everything, including family. The photograph represents a test. Can Stalin maintain that reputation when it costs him his son? The answer, in Stalin's mind, must be yes. The negotiations with Germany are allowed to continue, but Stalin has already decided. Yakov stays captured. The intelligence value has been extracted. The strategic game is over. April 12, 1943. German negotiators in Stockholm believe a deal is imminent. Soviet representatives have been responsive, asking detailed questions about logistics, about timing, about guarantees. The Germans prepare for Yakov's transfer. Arrangements are made. Neutral territory exchange. Swiss observers, specific protocols. Everything is being coordinated. Then, on April 13th, Soviet communication stops. Completely. The Germans send follow-up messages, no response. They probe through different channels. Silence. Representatives in Stockholm, Bern, Istanbul all report the same thing. Moscow has gone dark on the Yakov negotiations. What happened? Beria's diary provides the answer. On April 12th, Stalin called a final meeting. 4 people present. Stalin, Beria, 2 intelligence chiefs. The leather photograph was on the table. Stalin's instruction recorded, "Cease all communication." We're done. One of the intelligence chiefs asked why now when terms were almost finalized. Stalin's response, "We have what we needed. The rest is theater." The Germans had revealed everything, their desperation for Paulus, their internal morale problems, their willingness to trade almost anything for senior officers. Soviet intelligence had mapped the entire German POW value system. The negotiation had served its purpose. Yakov had served his purpose. As unwitting bait in an intelligence operation, Stalin never intended to complete the trade. The photograph was filed away that night. The talks were over. German confusion was immediate. Had the Soviets been serious? Had Stalin actually considered trading? Intelligence analysts would debate this for years. But Stalin's inner circle knew. It was always about information extraction, never about Yakov's return. Stalin had used his son's capture to understand German weaknesses, to probe their decision-making, to gain strategic advantage. The personal tragedy became a tool. The photograph went into Stalin's personal safe, not destroyed, but removed from active files. The calculation was complete. Yakov would remain in German hands, and Stalin's reputation as uncompromising, cold, strategic above all else, that remained intact. But now the Germans knew it too. They had been outplayed. The negotiation itself was the weapon. April 14th, 1943. Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Morning. Yakov Djugashvili walks the perimeter of the officers' exercise yard. Guards later report he seemed agitated, distracted. By afternoon, Yakov makes a decision. He runs toward the camp perimeter fence. Not the gate, The electrified fence, guarded, fatal. He's running directly at it. Guards shout warnings. Yakov doesn't stop. 3 guards open fire. Yakov falls 15 feet from the fence. The official German report filed within hours. Prisoner Djugashvili shot while attempting escape. The report is precise. Clinical. Multiple witnesses confirm the sequence. Yakov died at 4:17 p.m., April 14th, 1943. Was it escape attempt or something else? German officers debate this immediately. The timing is suspicious. Negotiations with Moscow just went silent. Did Yakov know? Did he somehow learn that Stalin wasn't coming for him, that the trade wouldn't happen? Or was it simply desperation after 2 years of captivity? Soviet intelligence receives the news within 36 hours through their network inside Germany. Beria delivers the report to Stalin personally. Late evening, April 16th. The description of Stalin's reaction comes from Beria's diary. Stalin took the report, read it twice, silent for several minutes. Then 4 words. He died as soldier. No emotion in the delivery, according to Beria. Just statement of fact. But Stalin's next action tells a different story. The leather photograph is pulled from the personal safe. Stalin places it on his desk. It stays there for 3 days. Multiple aides confirm this. Then it's returned to the safe, but not destroyed. Not discarded. A public statement is drafted but never released. Stalin decides silence is better. No acknowledgement, no comment. Yakov simply disappears from public record. But privately, Stalin issues orders to NKVD intelligence. Locate and secure all German interrogation records regarding Yakov, all camp reports, all documentation of his captivity. The order is marked urgent. Stalin wants to know everything that happened to his son during those 2 years, especially one thing. Did Yakov break? Did he cooperate beyond what was forced? May 1945, Berlin falls. Soviet forces capture Sachsenhausen camp and every document inside. The intelligence hall is enormous, records of thousands of prisoners, interrogation logs, camp administration files. Among them, complete documentation of Yakov Djugashvili's captivity. Every interrogation, every German attempt to extract cooperation, every propaganda session, all documented in meticulous German bureaucratic detail. The files are sent directly to Moscow, marked for Stalin's personal review. This is unusual. Stalin doesn't normally review individual POW records, but these are different. Stalin reads them over 3 nights in June 1945. The leather photograph is on his desk during these sessions. Witnesses later report seeing light in Stalin's study until 3 a.m. multiple nights. What did the records show? German interrogators documented consistent refusal. Yakov would read prepared statements when forced, but nothing more. He refused to elaborate, refused to call for Soviet surrender, refused to denounce Stalin beyond the specific words in the script. Multiple interrogators noted his stubborn defiance and maintenance of military bearing despite circumstance. Yakov never asked for special treatment, never offered information about Soviet positions or strategy, never cooperated beyond the absolute minimum required to avoid severe punishment. The German assessment, written in December 1942. Subject is of no intelligence value. Maintains loyalty to Soviet cause despite father's public disavowal. Propaganda value minimal due to refusal to authentically collaborate. Stalin's response to reading these files is documented in one cryptic note found after his death in 1953. Written on the final page of Yakov's interrogation summary in Stalin's handwriting, "He was stronger than I knew." 5 words, no other comment. The files were placed in Stalin's personal archive. The photograph was moved from the safe to his desk drawer. It would remain there, handled regularly until Stalin's death 8 years later. What changed for Stalin in reading those records? He learned that Yakov never broke, never truly collaborated, maintained dignity and defiance throughout captivity, and Stalin had chosen to leave him there. The strategic decision remained correct in Stalin's mind, but the cost became visible. The years between 1945 and Stalin's death in 1953 saw the photograph move from safe to desk drawer to jacket pocket. Staff noticed Stalin carrying it occasionally. Never displayed publicly, never mentioned, but present. The historical record shows something else in these years. Stalin's treatment of POWs who returned from German captivity was brutal. Many were sent directly to Gulag camps, suspected of collaboration, of weakness, of betrayal, simply by virtue of having surrendered. Stalin's logic was harsh. Any soldier who survived German captivity must have cooperated somehow. The standard was absolute: death before surrender. But Yakov's file sat in Stalin's personal archive. Stalin knew Yakov hadn't cooperated, knew he'd maintained defiance, knew he'd died attempting escape rather than wait for rescue that never came. The contrast was devastating. Stalin enforced ruthless standards on returning POWs while knowing his own son had met those standards, and Stalin had left him there anyway. The choice had been strategic. Trading Paulus for Yakov would have signaled sentiment over calculation, would have damaged Soviet negotiating position, would have shown the West that Stalin could be moved by personal considerations. Stalin's entire authority was built on being unmovable. The photograph stayed in his pocket. When Svetlana, Stalin's daughter, asked about Yakov in 1946, this conversation is documented, Stalin's response was brief. The Germans killed him. No elaboration, no emotion. But Svetlana later recalled Stalin pulling something from his pocket during that conversation. She couldn't see what, but the motion suggested a small object, handled briefly, then returned. The photograph. The hidden cost was becoming clear. Stalin had chosen correctly by his own strategic logic. The Soviet Union didn't trade. Stalin's reputation as cold and absolute remained intact. Soviet negotiating positions stayed strong. But the personal calculation was different. Every returning POW, every report of German camp conditions, every intelligence file about prisoner treatment, all of it reminded Stalin of what Yakov experienced while Stalin negotiated and then walked away. The strategic victory came with a weight Stalin carried privately for 8 years. March 5th, 1953. Stalin dies in his dacha outside Moscow. The death is sudden. Stroke, alone in his room, discovered hours later. In the chaos of transition, of Beria and Malenkov and Khrushchev maneuvering for power, of securing documents and controlling narrative, one small detail is noted by staff. In Stalin's desk drawer, beneath state papers and classified files, the leather-bound photograph from 1932, Stalin's family portrait, Yakov prominent. The photograph is worn now, leather cracked at the edges. The image itself faded from handling. On the back, a notation in Stalin's handwriting. 4 words, written in pencil, undated, did not break. That's all. No signature, no context, just the assessment. The photograph is given to Svetlana, Stalin's daughter, as part of his personal effects. She preserves it, later writing about it in her memoirs published in the West. The image survives, is photographed, enters historical record. Svetlana's description of finding it: he kept it close, always. I had not known. What stayed hidden was not weakness. Stalin never allowed that interpretation. What stayed hidden was the nature of the cost. Stalin's public position was correct by his own logic. The Soviet Union did not trade marshals for lieutenants. The state always came before personal considerations. Stalin's authority required absolute commitment to this principle. But the photograph told a different story, about which choice haunted him more. Not the choice to leave Yakov, which Stalin would have defended until his last breath as correct, but the discovery, years later, reading those German interrogation files, that Yakov had been stronger than Stalin anticipated, that his son had maintained exactly the standards Stalin demanded of all Soviet soldiers. And Stalin had known this and still left him. The strategic calculation was right. The personal weight was real. Both things were true. The photograph stayed in the drawer. The notation remained. And the question: did Stalin write those words in 1945 when he first read the files, or in 1952, near the end, looking back? No one knows. The aftermath reveals itself in fragments. Beria, interrogated after Stalin's death about the Yakov negotiations, testified that Stalin never wavered in his decision not to trade. But Beria also noted that Stalin kept the photograph within reach always, the last years especially. The contradiction defines everything. Khrushchev, delivering his secret speech in 1956 denouncing Stalin's crimes, mentioned Yakov only briefly. Stalin's own son, abandoned in German captivity, received no different treatment than any Soviet soldier. The statement was meant to emphasize Stalin's fairness, his refusal to grant special privilege. But it also confirmed what many suspected. Stalin had chosen strategy over family. Svetlana's memoirs, published decades later, revealed the most personal details. She wrote, "My father carried grief privately, showed it to no one, perhaps not even to himself. But the photograph was always there, always handled, always returned to the same place. This was his way." The historical debate continues. Was Stalin's refusal to trade Yakov cold strategic brilliance or unnecessary cruelty? Could he have secured Yakov's return without compromising Soviet position? The 17 secret communications suggest Stalin explored options, but ultimately chose not to act. The German perspective, revealed in post-war interrogations, was unanimous. They believed Stalin would trade. When negotiations stopped abruptly, German intelligence concluded Stalin was more ruthless than anticipated, willing to sacrifice even his own blood for strategic advantage. They weren't wrong, but they also weren't entirely right. The photograph preserved by Svetlana hangs now in a Moscow museum, part of an exhibition on Stalin's personal life. Visitors see it, see Yakov's young face, read the brief explanation. Stalin's son, captured by Germans, died in captivity 1943. The notation on the back is not displayed. It remains in Svetlana's private papers. Did not break. 4 words that reveal everything Stalin wouldn't say publicly. Yakov had met the standard. Stalin had left him anyway. The choice was strategically correct and personally devastating. Both were true. The legend simplifies it. Stalin chose power over family, but the photograph tells a different story about a leader who made the hard choice, knew it was right, and carried the weight of it until he died. The photograph sits in the archive now, image faded, leather cracked, Yakov's face barely visible through decades of handling and age. The notation on the back, "Did not break," remains preserved, though few see it. What began as a family memento from 1932 became evidence of character, then tool in strategic calculation, then finally weight carried privately for 8 years. The object moved through all these meanings, held by hands that shaped the 20th century, hands that never trembled publicly but perhaps did in private, late at night, alone with the evidence of impossible choices. Stalin's public answer was always clear: "We do not trade." He repeated it in speeches, in meetings, in communications with Allied leaders. The principle was absolute. Soviet officers were not commodities to be exchanged based on rank or relationship. To make an exception for Yakov would undermine everything Stalin had built. The logic was sound. The execution was perfect. The cost was real. What history records is the refusal, the cold calculation, the strategic victory. What stayed hidden was the worn photograph, the late-night reading of interrogation files, the notation written in private. Stalin proved he would sacrifice anything, including his son, for the Soviet state. He proved he was exactly as uncompromising as his reputation claimed. And he spent 8 years carrying proof that his son had been worthy of a different choice. The leather binding is split now, the paper yellowed, but Yakov's image remains, faint but present, preserved by daughter who understood what her father couldn't say. The real exchange wasn't prisoner swap. It wasn't Yakov for Paulus. Wasn't life for life. The real exchange was Stalin learning his son's character too late to act on it, learning strength when only strategy mattered, finding pride in circumstances that forbade showing it. The photograph carried all of this: public rejection and private respect, correct decision and permanent weight. What stayed in the drawer, handled regularly, kept close until the end, was not weakness. It was evidence of the choice that proved strength and cost everything else.